I used to think my daughter had finally found the perfect man. That was before I followed her husband to the lake one freezing night and watched him shove a metal barrel into the dark water like he was trying to bury something forever. The sound coming from inside that barrel still wakes me up sometimes. What terrified me most was not the lies, the money, or even the crimes I would eventually uncover. It was the look on my daughter's face when she realized the man she trusted more than anyone had quietly turned her life into a trap she could not even see. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Margaret Doyle, and by the age of 67, I thought I had learned how to recognize dangerous people before they could destroy a family. For almost 20 years, I worked as a forensic accountant in Seattle, investigating financial fraud cases that usually began with someone charming enough to earn trust before quietly stealing everything behind closed doors. Men like that rarely looked dangerous. They looked polished, calm, generous, and respectable. That was what frightened me most about Nathan Keller the very first time I met him. After my husband Patrick died from pancreatic cancer 4 years earlier, my life became painfully quiet. I moved back to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to the small lakeside house where Patrick and I had spent our summers during retirement planning years before illness ruined those dreams. Most mornings, I watered my garden, volunteered twice a week at St. Luke's Church pantry, and spent evenings watching the lake darken beneath the pine-covered hills. It was not an exciting life, but it was peaceful enough to survive loneliness. My daughter Emily called me almost every evening. At 34, she still carried the same soft heart she had as a little girl, always wanting to believe the best in people, even after several relationships had left her disappointed and emotionally exhausted. When she told me she had met someone serious, I wanted desperately to believe her luck had finally changed. Nathan Keller arrived in our lives like a man stepping out of an expensive television drama. He was handsome in a polished, effortless way, with silver threaded through his dark hair and a calm confidence that made people pay attention whenever he entered a room. He claimed to work in luxury real estate development around northern Idaho and western Montana. Within months, he was sponsoring retirement charity dinners, donating money to church restoration projects, and organizing fundraisers for elderly residents struggling with medical bills. Half the town adored him before the wedding invitations were even mailed. Their engagement party took place beside the lake at a private country club covered in white lights and polished cedar decorations. Wealthy investors and local business owners circled Nathan all evening while he smiled with effortless precision. I spent most of the night quietly watching him instead of listening to him. That was when the uneasiness began. Nathan remembered private details too quickly. He knew which guests were behind on property taxes, whose husband had recently entered assisted living, and which local families were preparing to sell land near the lake. He never asked careless questions. He observed first, then spoke carefully after studying reactions around him. At one point, somebody asked Emily whether she planned to continue teaching after the wedding. Before she could answer, Nathan casually responded for her, explaining how stressful teaching had become and how happy he was that she could finally relax more. Emily smiled afterward, but I noticed the hesitation in her eyes before she nodded agreement. Over the following weeks, smaller things began bothering me. Emily apologized constantly, even for harmless comments. She glanced toward Nathan before answering simple questions. She stopped meeting old friends for coffee. And shortly after the wedding, Nathan developed a nightly habit of driving to Hayden Lake to go fishing alone. Emily described it casually, saying it helped him clear his head after stressful workdays. But Nathan never smelled like lake water. His expensive jackets remained spotless. He never mentioned bait, weather conditions, or fishing stories. Most importantly, he never brought home a single fish. One cold October evening, I stood beside my front window and watched his black sport utility vehicle disappear down the winding lakeside road toward the dark water. A terrible feeling settled into my stomach then, sharp and instinctive, exactly like the feeling I used to get before uncovering fraud cases that eventually destroyed entire families. Somewhere beneath Nathan Keller's perfect smile, something was deeply wrong. About 3 weeks after the wedding, Nathan's nighttime routine became so precise, it started feeling less like a hobby and more like a scheduled operation. Every evening, almost down to the minute, he finished dinner quickly, checked his phone several times, then disappeared toward Hayden Lake shortly after 8 o'clock. The pattern never changed. Autumn settled heavily over Coeur d'Alene that year. Thick fog rolled across the water after sunset, swallowing the pine-covered shoreline and turning the narrow roads silver beneath the headlights. The town grew unusually quiet once darkness arrived. Small boats drifted in the distance like faint ghosts on the water, while cold mountain air carried the smell of cedar and wet earth through the neighborhoods near the lake. I started paying closer attention to Emily during those evenings. The changes in her frightened me more than Nathan's behavior ever could. Her skin had become pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes no matter how much makeup she used. She had always laughed easily as a child, but now every smile seemed delayed, as though she needed permission from herself before expressing happiness. Even her posture had changed. She sat carefully, shoulders tense, constantly glancing toward Nathan before speaking. Part of me hated my own suspicions. After years investigating fraud cases, I knew how easily mistrust could become a permanent instinct. I kept wondering whether retirement, grief, and loneliness had quietly turned me into one of those bitter older women who destroy relationships because they cannot accept change. Emily deserved happiness after years of disappointment. I reminded myself of that constantly. One Sunday evening, I visited their lakeside house for dinner. Nathan remained perfectly polite the entire night, discussing local charity projects and property development around northern Idaho with smooth confidence. Yet every conversation involving finances shifted direction almost immediately whenever I asked deeper questions. He never refused to answer directly. He simply redirected discussion so naturally that most people would never notice. I noticed something else before he left for the lake that night. The black fishing bag he carried looked unusually heavy, forcing him to lift it carefully with both hands. Yet, I had still never once seen him unpack actual fishing equipment around the house. Emily quietly mentioned that Nathan recently convinced her to stop tutoring students after school because they no longer needed extra income. That statement bothered me deeply. Emily had always valued earning her own money. Independence mattered to her even when she was young. As dinner ended, I saw prescription bottles near the kitchen sink with Emily's name attached. Nathan casually explained they helped her sleep better after stressful workdays. But over the next hour, Emily became strangely distracted and forgetful. At one point, she struggled to remember signing financial paperwork Nathan claimed she had completed earlier that week. That moment stayed with me long after I drove home. Near midnight, I sat alone at my kitchen table researching Nathan Keller online. For someone supposedly successful in luxury real estate, his history felt strangely thin. Very few old photographs existed before 2 years ago. Corporate records appeared shallow, almost recently manufactured. Most disturbing of all, Nathan seemed to appear in Idaho without much trace of where he had truly come from before. I had seen patterns like that before. Financial predators often rebuilt themselves under polished new identities whenever previous scams became dangerous. 2 nights later, I drove past Hayden Lake unexpectedly. Nathan's vehicle was parked far away from the normal fishing docks near an isolated boat ramp hidden between dense trees. From the darkness, I watched him standing beside his trunk holding something large and rectangular. Before I could move closer, another vehicle turned onto the road behind me. I drove away immediately without being seen, but my decision had already been made. The following night, I was going to follow Nathan Keller properly. The following evening, I prepared for the kind of surveillance work I had not done in nearly 15 years. The realization alone made me feel ridiculous. I was a 67-year-old widow spying on my daughter's husband in the middle of an Idaho autumn night. Still, the uneasiness inside me had grown too strong to ignore. I dressed in dark layers against the cold and packed an old flashlight and binoculars that had belonged to Patrick during our camping years. As I drove toward Emily's neighborhood, guilt sat heavily in my chest. Part of me still hoped I would discover something harmless and embarrass myself for overreacting. But another part of me, the sharper part forged during years investigating financial predators, already knew innocent people rarely behaved like Nathan Keller. The roads around Hayden Lake were nearly empty that night. Wind pushed through the pines in restless waves, while pale moonlight reflected across the dark water like broken glass. I followed Nathan from a distance, keeping several turns between us whenever possible. His black sport utility vehicle moved confidently through the winding roads until he passed the public fishing docks again without slowing. Instead, he continued toward an abandoned boat launch area hidden deep along the northern shoreline. I parked behind a thick cluster of cedar trees overlooking the old dock. The area had not been maintained in years. Rusted railings leaned toward the water, and broken concrete slabs disappeared beneath weeds and damp moss. No nearby homes overlooked the lake from that section. It was isolated enough that nobody would casually wander there after dark. Nathan stepped from his vehicle, but did not remove fishing equipment immediately. A second vehicle arrived several minutes later, an older pickup truck with mud splashed across the sides. 2 men climbed out. Even from a distance, their body language unsettled me. No casual movements, no relaxed conversation. Everything about them felt tense and deliberate. Then they unloaded the barrel. It was large, industrial, and metallic, the kind normally used for heavy construction waste or hazardous materials. The 3 men struggled lifting it from the truck bed, and one side appeared dented inward as though something had slammed against it repeatedly. I tightened my grip on the binoculars when I heard a faint scraping sound drift across the water. Something moved inside. A terrible chill crawled through my stomach. Nathan scanned the darkness around the shoreline before speaking quietly to the others. I could not hear the words, but his tone carried authority. The men dragged the barrel toward the edge of the dock with visible effort. Halfway there, another muffled impact echoed from inside the metal container. My pulse began hammering painfully. Without hesitation, the 3 men shoved the barrel into the lake. The splash exploded across the silent water before the barrel slowly disappeared beneath the surface. Ripples spread outward beneath the moonlight until the lake swallowed everything completely. And then Nathan calmly opened the back of his vehicle, removed a fishing rod, and sat beside the dock like an ordinary man enjoying a peaceful night alone. That was the moment I understood the fishing trips were never about fishing. I remained hidden for more than an hour, terrified to move. The 2 men eventually drove away first, while Nathan deliberately stayed behind, casting his line into the lake at steady intervals. It was a performance designed to create witnesses if anyone ever asked questions later. Before leaving, Nathan suddenly turned his head toward the trees where I was hiding. For one horrifying second, I thought he saw me. I stayed frozen, until he finally looked away. When I drove home that night, my hands shook against the steering wheel hard enough to blur the road ahead. I realized then that I was no longer dealing with a controlling husband or a financial manipulator. I had stumbled into something far more dangerous. I did not sleep at all after returning home from Hayden Lake. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the scraping sounds from inside that metal barrel and saw Nathan staring toward the darkness where I had been hiding. By 3 a.m, I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with cold coffee in my hands, trying to decide whether to call the police anonymously. Fear stopped me every time I reached for the telephone. I had no proof of what I witnessed beyond vague suspicions and a barrel sitting somewhere beneath deep water. Worse than that, Emily's name could already be tangled inside whatever Nathan was doing. If I handled this badly, my daughter could become collateral damage before I even understood the full situation. By dawn, I made my decision. I was going back to the lake myself. The old instincts I thought retirement had buried years earlier returned with uncomfortable familiarity. I gathered heavy rope, waterproof flashlights, diving gloves, and an emergency toolkit Patrick used to keep organized on the garage shelves. Outside, freezing fog drifted across Hayden Lake in pale waves, while the shoreline remained silent, except for distant birds moving through the pines. The abandoned dock looked even more unsettling in daylight. Rusted chains swung gently beside cracked concrete, while dark water stretched motionless beneath the gray morning sky. I tied one end of the rope around a support beam before carefully climbing down the slippery rocks near the shoreline. The cold nearly stole my breath immediately. Several times I questioned whether I had completely lost my mind. My knees ached from the uneven rocks, and my hands shook badly from both age and fear. But every time hesitation crept in, I pictured Emily's exhausted face and remembered the empty expression in her eyes lately. That kept me moving. After nearly 40 exhausting minutes, my gloved hands finally struck metal beneath the water. The barrel had partially settled into the muddy lake floor, but trapped air inside kept it from becoming impossibly heavy. Using the rope inch by inch, I dragged it toward the shore until part of the damaged lid surfaced above the waterline. Then I heard movement inside. A violent scraping sound rattled through the barrel. Panic surged through me instantly. For one horrifying moment, I thought there might still be a person trapped alive inside. My hands fumbled through Patrick's old tools until I forced the dented lid partially open with a crowbar. The first thing I saw was a small, terrified dog trapped inside a metal crate. The poor animal trembled violently as I pulled the cage free. Its fur was soaked, and its breathing sounded weak and shallow. Rage flooded through me so suddenly, I almost became dizzy. Nathan had thrown a living creature into freezing water like garbage. Inside the barrel sat several waterproof hard drives, stacks of financial records sealed in plastic, destroyed cellular telephones, burner phones, and folders packed with legal documents. I spread everything across the damp shoreline carefully while the dog curled weakly beside my coat. The files made my blood run cold. Retirement accounts, property deeds, forged signatures, transfer authorizations, and Emily's signature appeared everywhere. My daughter had unknowingly become the visible legal face attached to dozens of fraudulent financial transactions targeting elderly residents throughout Coeur d'Alene. Nathan had built protection for himself directly around her identity. As I continued searching the folders, I discovered lists of scheduled property seizures and shell companies connected to enormous transfers of money moving across multiple states. This operation was far larger than ordinary fraud. Then I found one final folder. An elderly woman's name was printed across the front. She had disappeared from town 8 months earlier. When I opened the file, my entire body went cold. The folder belonged to Eleanor Grayson. Even before opening it fully, I recognized the name immediately. Eleanor had once owned a successful lakeside resort outside Coeur d'Alene before suddenly disappearing 8 months earlier. Most people in town believe she sold her property and moved south after declining health made retirement difficult. I remembered briefly feeling sorry for her at the time, then continuing with my own life like everyone else. Now, guilt settled heavily in my stomach. Inside the folder were surveillance photographs, property transfer agreements, banking records, and pages of handwritten behavioral notes. Nathan had documented Eleanor's daily routines with disturbing precision. He recorded when she visited the pharmacy, how often she attended church, and which neighbor still checked on her regularly. Reading through the pages felt less like reviewing financial fraud and more like studying a predator's hunting journal. Eleanor initially refused to sell her lakefront property despite increasing pressure from investors. Nathan responded by systematically isolating her. Financial notes showed mysterious debts suddenly appearing against her accounts. Anonymous complaints had been filed regarding supposed safety violations at her resort. Utility shutoff notices appeared repeatedly despite proof of payment. Nathan had cornered her slowly from every direction. Then I found copies of complaints Eleanor attempted filing with local authorities weeks before she vanished. The reports described suspicious financial activity, intimidation, and unauthorized access to her property records. None of the complaints appeared fully investigated. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Back at home, I connected one of the hard drives to my laptop and began reviewing the video files stored inside. The footage was professionally organized into folders labeled with initials and dates. Most videos showed elderly residents sitting at tables signing paperwork, while Nathan calmly guided conversations from off-camera. Some victims looked medicated or confused. Others appeared frightened and exhausted. Every recording carried the same unsettling pattern. Nathan remained patient, reassuring, and controlled while quietly manipulating vulnerable people into surrendering property, money, or legal authority. Then I found Eleanor's video. The footage opened inside what looked like her own living room. Eleanor appeared frail and visibly distressed, clutching a blanket tightly around her shoulders while Nathan sat across from her with transfer documents spread neatly on the table. Even through the screen, I could see fear in her eyes. Several times she refused to sign. Nathan remained calm throughout the exchange, almost soothing, which somehow made the scene more disturbing. Eleanor finally threatened police involvement near the end of the recording. The video abruptly stopped seconds later. I sat frozen in silence long after the screen went dark. Fraud no longer explained everything I had discovered. Nathan was operating like someone who understood exactly how to erase people without attracting attention. Worse still, Emily married him only a few months after Eleanor disappeared. That timing terrified me. Predators often rebuilt themselves after exposure. I had investigated enough financial criminals to recognize the pattern. Nathan likely needed a fresh identity, fresh social protection, and new legal insulation after Eleanor became dangerous to him. Emily had unknowingly become that protection. I spent the rest of the evening copying every digital file onto multiple backup drives. One I hid beneath old paint cans in my garage. Another disappeared inside Patrick's forgotten fishing tackle box. A third remained sealed inside an envelope prepared for emergency mailing if something happened to me. Near midnight, while organizing the final documents, headlights slowly swept across my living room wall. A black sport utility vehicle rolled past my house and paused near the mailbox. I could not clearly see the driver through the darkness, but I recognized Nathan's vehicle immediately. The cold fear rising through my chest told me something terrible. Nathan might already know somebody found the barrel. I stood motionless behind my living room curtains while Nathan's sport utility vehicle remained parked near my mailbox. The engine idled softly beneath the darkness for nearly a full minute before the headlights slowly moved away down the road. Even after the vehicle disappeared, I could still feel danger lingering around the house like smoke after a fire. That was the moment everything became personal. Until then, part of me still viewed Nathan as a financial predator operating behind polished smiles and forged paperwork. But criminals only watch houses at midnight when they suspect somebody has become a threat. I barely slept. Before sunrise, I contacted Daniel Mercer, a retired financial crimes investigator I had worked with years earlier in Seattle. Daniel listened quietly while I explained only the essential details. When I mentioned shell companies, missing funds, and property transfers connected across multiple states, his tone changed immediately. He warned me the structure sounded organized and far more dangerous than isolated fraud. He also warned me not to trust local authorities too quickly until evidence was fully secured. People like Nathan survived by building relationships in communities before victims understood what was happening. After ending the call, I backed up every file again and checked my windows repeatedly throughout the day. Twice, unfamiliar vehicles passed slowly near my street. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe fear was distorting my judgment. But the sensation of being watched never disappeared. That evening, I drove to Emily's house unannounced. The moment she opened the door, my heart sank. She looked exhausted, pale beneath the kitchen lights, with the same distant expression I had seen in victims whose lives were slowly being controlled by manipulation and medication. Property transfer documents covered the dining table behind her, neatly stacked beside a pen already positioned for signatures. Emily admitted Nathan handled nearly all their finances now because the paperwork overwhelmed her lately. The statement felt unnatural coming from my daughter. Emily had once balanced 3 jobs during college without complaint, simply because she hated depending on anybody financially. As we spoke, I noticed prescription bottles near the sink again. Emily quietly mentioned Nathan recently increased her sleeping medication because stress had been making her emotional and forgetful. The realization sickened me. Nathan was not simply manipulating her psychologically anymore. He was chemically controlling her ability to think clearly. Then the front door opened unexpectedly. Nathan returned earlier than usual carrying grocery bags, while calm confidence settled immediately across his face the second he saw me standing in the kitchen. He remained perfectly polite, but I noticed how carefully his eyes studied my reactions. The conversation that followed felt less like family interaction and more like 2 opponents testing each other beneath layers of false civility. Nathan casually mentioned Hayden Lake several times while asking strange questions about how I had been spending my evenings recently. Every word sounded harmless. None of it felt harmless. He knew something had changed. A few minutes later, Nathan stepped into the garage to retrieve another bag from his vehicle. The second the door closed behind him, I moved toward Emily immediately. I finally told her the truth. Nathan had been using her identity inside the illegal financial operations connected to elderly victims across northern Idaho. I explained about the forged documents, the hidden records, and the evidence I already secured safely elsewhere. Emily's face collapsed in disbelief. Upstairs, she hurriedly packed a small bag while struggling to process everything I had revealed. I remained downstairs, watching the kitchen window nervously. Then I saw Nathan crossing the driveway toward the house much earlier than expected, and I realized we might already be out of time. If you're still with us after that shocking confrontation and want to see what happens next, comment number 6 below to let me know. Now, let's move on to Chapter 7, where everything finally begins collapsing around Nathan's carefully built lies. The moment I saw Nathan approaching the house through the kitchen window, panic tightened around my chest so hard it became difficult to breathe. Emily was still upstairs throwing clothes into a bag while trying to process the truth I had just dropped into her life. If Nathan had heard anything, even part of our conversation, the situation could turn dangerous very quickly. When he entered the kitchen, silence immediately settled over the room. Nathan placed the grocery bag on the counter with calm precision, but his eyes moved across the house too carefully. He sensed tension instantly. People like him survived by reading emotional shifts before others recognized them themselves. Emily descended the stairs slowly, visibly shaken and emotionally exhausted. The medication fog clouding her thoughts only made her more vulnerable now that fear and confusion were colliding inside her at once. Nathan noticed the overnight bag beside the staircase immediately. His expression barely changed. Instead of anger, he used concern. That frightened me more. Nathan gently questioned whether Emily had become overwhelmed recently and suggested my imagination might be affecting her emotionally. The manipulation unfolded so smoothly, I suddenly understood how isolated Emily must have become over the past year. Nathan never controlled through shouting or visible cruelty. He controlled by quietly reshaping reality until doubt replaced trust. For several painful minutes, Emily looked trapped between us, unable to fully decide which version of reality she believed anymore. Then I finally told Nathan the truth. I revealed that I recovered the barrel from Hayden Lake. For the first time since meeting him, Nathan Keller lost control of his expression. The reaction lasted barely a second, but I saw it clearly. Genuine fear cracked through the calm mask he wore so perfectly around everyone else. Emily saw it too. That single moment shattered something inside her. I watched realization spread across her face with devastating clarity. Nathan adjusted immediately. The warmth disappeared from his voice entirely, replaced by cold calculation. He calmly explained that Emily's signatures connected her legally to multiple property transfers and financial operations. If authorities became involved publicly, she could easily appear responsible for everything. The cruelty of the scheme finally became fully visible to me then. Nathan had built legal insulation around himself, using my daughter's identity as protection. Emily broke down emotionally. She blamed herself for signing documents she barely remembered reviewing. She cried over trusting him so completely. Nathan quietly encouraged that guilt, subtly implying my interference would destroy whatever future she still had left. I refused to let him regain control. I informed him the evidence had already been copied and secured safely, including proof that Emily had been manipulated medically and financially. Nathan listened without interruption, but something darker settled behind his eyes after that. When he finally spoke again, his tone changed completely. He warned me there were people beyond him involved in the operation, individuals far more dangerous than either of us understood. For the first time, I sensed genuine anxiety beneath his control, as though even he feared what might happen if the fraud network collapsed publicly. Then his telephone rang. Nathan answered quietly near the window, while Emily cried silently beside the stairs. I watched his expression harden during the short conversation. Whatever he heard clearly unsettled him. Without another argument, he grabbed his keys and left the house, warning me not to contact federal authorities yet. The second the door closed behind him, Emily collapsed into my arms, shaking uncontrollably. Minutes later, a message arrived from Daniel Mercer warning me that federal investigators were already tracing suspicious financial activity connected to shell corporations across several states. Everything was accelerating now. As darkness settled outside, I locked every door in the house and realized our lives were already in far greater danger than I had imagined. That night, I brought Emily back to my lakeside house because neither of us trusted leaving her alone anymore. She barely slept during the following days. The withdrawal from the medication Nathan had been giving her left her emotionally fragile and physically drained. Some nights, she wandered into the kitchen at 3 in the morning, unable to remember whether she had eaten dinner. Other times, she woke shaking from panic attacks after fragmented memories surfaced unexpectedly. Watching my daughter rebuild her own thoughts piece by piece broke my heart. While Emily rested, I continued organizing the evidence Nathan left hidden inside the barrel. Daniel Mercer called almost daily now. Federal investigators had already begun tracing suspicious shell corporations connected to luxury retirement developments across several western states. According to Daniel, Nathan's operation matched patterns from several unresolved financial investigations involving elderly victims. The network was finally beginning to crack open. As Emily slowly regained mental clarity, she started remembering details that disturbed her deeply. Nathan controlled nearly every part of her life during the marriage, without her fully recognizing it at the time. He redirected her mail, discouraged private conversations with friends, managed all financial passwords, and constantly monitored her emotional state. The isolation happened gradually enough that she mistook control for care. The realization devastated her. Still, I could see strength slowly returning beneath the fear. Emily eventually agreed to cooperate fully with the federal investigators once Daniel arranged secure communication channels outside local law enforcement. She no longer wanted to hide from what Nathan had done. Meanwhile, the additional hard drives revealed even more disturbing information. Nathan had lived under variations of his identity in multiple retirement communities across Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Northern California. Everywhere he went, similar patterns followed him. Wealthy widows lost property unexpectedly. Elderly investors signed fraudulent transfers during periods of illness or medication dependency. Small towns experienced quiet financial collapses that never seemed fully connected publicly. Nathan reinvented himself repeatedly whenever suspicion became dangerous. One file shocked even Daniel. A woman from Nevada previously listed as missing might still be alive under federal protection after escaping one of Nathan's earlier fraud operations years ago. That discovery transformed the investigation completely. Authorities now believed Nathan's organization stretched far beyond Idaho. Within days, local news stations began reporting sudden federal investigations into suspicious real estate activity around Coeur d'Alene. Panic spread quickly across town as elderly residents discovered retirement funds disappearing and hidden property transfers filed without clear understanding. Some victims had signed documents believing they were refinancing medical debts or adjusting estate paperwork. Many never realized they had surrendered ownership of their homes. The emotional weight of that realization hit me harder than I expected. Nathan had not simply manipulated isolated victims. He quietly poisoned trust throughout the entire community. 3 nights later, Daniel contacted me again with another development. Federal agents raided one of Nathan's shell offices after employees abruptly disappeared overnight. Inside, authorities discovered false passports, cash reserves, shredded records, and maps highlighting retirement communities across multiple states. Nathan had clearly prepared another escape plan long before I uncovered the barrel. He never intended to stay anywhere permanently. Near midnight, another message arrived from Daniel. Authorities believed Nathan might already be heading north toward the Canadian border. As I stared across the dark lake outside my window, I realized the final confrontation might come sooner than any of us expected. If you've made it this far, and you're ready to discover how this story finally ends, comment number 8 below, so I know you're staying until the conclusion. Now, let's move into the final part of this journey and uncover the truth waiting at the end. Several weeks passed before federal authorities finally confirmed Nathan Keller's arrest near the Canadian border. He had been traveling under false identification with large amounts of cash and multiple forged passports hidden inside his vehicle. By then, investigators already uncovered enough evidence to expose an interstate fraud network far larger than anyone in Coeur d'Alene had imagined. Millions of dollars had been stolen from retirees across several states. Even after hearing the news, I did not feel triumph the way I once expected. Relief came first, followed by exhaustion so deep it settled into my bones. But beneath that relief remained anger for the damage Nathan left behind in every community he touched. Federal investigators officially cleared Emily from criminal responsibility after reviewing medical records, forged documents, and evidence showing years of psychological and chemical manipulation. Even so, Emily struggled emotionally with the realization that her name had been attached to so much suffering. Healing did not happen quickly. Some mornings, she woke determined to rebuild her life. Other days, guilt swallowed her completely. Therapy helped slowly, especially once she understood how carefully manipulation isolates trust before victims recognize what is happening. Nathan never forced control openly. He reshaped reality gradually until dependence replaced confidence. I stayed beside her through all of it. Meanwhile, our town continued dealing with the wreckage Nathan's operation exposed. Some elderly victims recovered portions of their savings through emergency federal intervention. Others permanently lost homes or retirement accounts they spent decades building. The emotional damage stretched even further than the financial losses. Neighbors no longer trusted contracts, investment offers, or even simple acts of generosity without suspicion. I began volunteering quietly with legal aid groups, helping elderly residents review financial paperwork and identify fraud warning signs. At first, I only wanted to keep myself busy while Emily recovered. But over time, the work became meaningful in ways I had not expected. Pain felt easier to survive once it became useful to someone else. Spring slowly returned to Hayden Lake as the investigations continued. The heavy winter fog disappeared from the shoreline, replaced by brighter mornings and warmer evenings drifting through the pines. The change in season felt strangely symbolic after months of fear and secrecy. Then another breakthrough arrived. Authorities located Eleanor Grayson alive in an assisted living facility outside Nevada under fraudulent legal guardianship connected to one of Nathan's shell companies. She had been isolated financially and medically, while her assets were quietly transferred through false agreements. Rescuing her became one of the strongest cases federal prosecutors built against Nathan's organization. That discovery affected me deeply. For months, I feared the worst about Eleanor's disappearance. Knowing she survived reminded me that exposing Nathan saved more people than I originally understood. One evening, Emily and I sat together on the back porch, overlooking the lake while sunlight reflected softly across the water. For the first time in many months, I heard her laugh naturally at something small and unimportant. The sound nearly brought me to tears. Surviving betrayal does not erase scars. Some wounds remain permanently woven into memory. But once truth finally surfaces, healing slowly becomes possible again. 1 year after Nathan Keller's arrest, Hayden Lake finally looked peaceful again. Early summer sunlight stretched across the water each morning, while fishing boats drifted quietly through the mist. Sometimes I still caught myself staring toward the old abandoned dock, remembering the night everything changed. It felt strange how a single decision to follow my daughter's husband reshaped every part of our lives afterward. Emily was healthier now than I had seen her in years. She returned to teaching full-time at the elementary school and slowly rebuilt the confidence Nathan spent so long dismantling. The smallest changes mattered most to me. She no longer apologized constantly during conversations. She no longer checked people's reactions before expressing an opinion. Fear stopped living permanently behind her eyes. Several months earlier, she even began cautiously dating again. Watching her laugh naturally over dinner one evening nearly broke my heart in the best possible way. Our relationship changed too. The experience that almost destroyed us ultimately removed years of emotional distance neither of us fully recognized before. Emily called me nearly every day again, not from anxiety or dependence, but because trust had returned between us completely. Meanwhile, the community around Coeur d'Alene slowly healed from the damage Nathan's organization left behind. Some financial losses could never fully be recovered, but people stopped hiding their shame. Elderly residents began speaking openly about scams, manipulation, and the fear of appearing vulnerable. I continued volunteering with support groups and legal aid programs helping retirees review suspicious contracts and property documents. Over time, I realized predators like Nathan survive by isolating people emotionally. Shame keeps victims silent, while manipulation convinces them nobody else will understand. Once people finally speak openly, that isolation begins losing power. Nathan eventually faced dozens of federal charges involving fraud conspiracy, identity theft, financial exploitation, interstate criminal operations, and animal cruelty connected to the evidence hidden inside the barrel. Several members of his wider network were arrested during the following months, as investigators uncovered similar operations across multiple states. Oddly enough, I no longer feared him by then. One morning near the anniversary of his arrest, I walked alone beside Hayden Lake just after sunrise. The water reflected gold beneath the mountains, while the cold pine air drifted gently across the shoreline. Standing there, I found myself thinking about Patrick and how proud he would have been of Emily's strength through everything that happened. Later that evening, Emily thanked me quietly for refusing to stop fighting, even when everyone else trusted Nathan completely. The emotion in her voice stayed with me long afterward. Protecting family sometimes means becoming stronger than fear itself. Nathan believed charm made him untouchable. He believed older women were easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, easy to manipulate through grief, loneliness, or exhaustion. What he never understood was that mothers who survive loss become incredibly difficult to intimidate. We learn how to endure. We learn how to keep standing when fear should break us. And sometimes, when the people we love are threatened, we become far more dangerous than the predators hunting them. Every night, Nathan claimed he was only going fishing at the lake. He never imagined the lake would eventually expose everything he tried to bury beneath its dark water. Some wounds do not disappear with time. They simply become quieter, settling deep inside the heart like scars beneath still water. But the truth has a strange way of surviving, even when fear, lies, and manipulation try to bury it for years. Sometimes the people who appear strongest are the ones silently carrying the deepest pain. And sometimes healing only begins when silence finally ends. Trust can be broken in a moment, yet rebuilding it takes courage, honesty, and the willingness to keep moving forward after betrayal. In the end, darkness only survives where people feel alone. The moment someone chooses to speak, fight back, or protect the ones they love, hope begins returning little by little. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If this journey moved you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more emotional stories like this one.